I'm Harry Cooper, curator of modern art here at the National Gallery, and I had the great pleasure recently of installing a trio of galleries on the ground floor dedicated to American art of the first half of the 20th century. So I'm delighted to be feeding you with objects of art. And I should say that I installed those with the help of Charlie Brock, Nancy Anderson, Sarah Greeno, and Judith Brody, which is possibly a record for the ratio of curators to number of galleries. But I'm not an Americanist, and they helped me. But I do love the work of Arthur Dove in particular, which is why I wanted to introduce Rachel DeLu, our next speaker. Rachel, who received her PhD from Johns Hopkins in 2001, is Associate Professor of American Art at Princeton. And she is well known for her book on George Inness and the Science of Landscape from 2004. More recently, she co-edited with James Elkins Landscape Theory, 2008. And I'm very eager to get my hands on her new book that came out this year, Arthur Dove, Always Connect. And she's going to be talking about Dove, but she is also able to talk about Camille Pissarro, Spike Lee, Charles Darwin, Kara Walker, Michael Ray Charles, Samuel Morse, and many others. And as you know, her work is marked by this ability to bring all kinds of things to the table. And in this case, she, I think, is going to be tying things up and keeping them together with the motif of the circle in the work of Arthur Dove. So please welcome Rachel DeLu.
Good afternoon, Harry. Thank you very much. Harry said that one of his favorite artists is Dove, but I should add that he's written splendidly on Dove, and his short article on Dove was something that actually provided great insight for me as I was working on my book. I want to say a couple of things. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm delighted to be here back at the National Gallery. The research for the Inness book took place in large part here when I was a fellow at the Center for Advanced Study, and I count many works of art in this gallery as old friends, and I have many, I don't want to say old friends, but good friends in the gallery as well, including Frank Kelly, who was a wonderful mentor to me while I was here. I should also say that it's quite delightful to be speaking on the occasion of the John Wilmerding Symposium on American Art, because I am supposedly, putatively, theoretically his replacement at Princeton, and because John is irreplaceable, I stand here as a very sorry substitution for him, but it's been a real pleasure to follow in his footsteps and also to benefit from his mentoring. When I began at Princeton, he was still there and taught there for several more years while I got, let's say, my feet wet, and was an incredibly important part of that first bit of the Princeton adventure for me. So I'm going to begin my talk by saying something about the first category in the subtitle of the talk. The talk is Arthur Dove, Circles, Signs, and Sounds, and that first category, circles, I want to say a little bit about. Now, I decided to talk about circles today for two reasons. First, because there are a lot of them, a lot of circles in Arthur Dove's paintings. And I'm showing you two here. On the left is the National Gallery's absolutely wonderful Moon from 1935, and on the right is Golden Sun from 1937. So there are a lot of circles in Dove's art, and in my lecture today, I'm going to attempt to account for that fact. But the second reason is as follows. John Wilmerding has had many interesting things to say about circles over the years, and especially in his book, Compass and Clock, Defining Moments in American Culture, which appeared in 1999, right around the time I was finishing up my PhD dissertation and preparing for my first teaching job, which meant that I was also spending a good deal of time thinking about what sort of scholar of American art I wanted to be. John's book resonated, for it offered a model of historical inquiry within which micro-histories of individual artists and works of art were woven into bigger picture considerations of the history of ideas and period paradigms of seeing and knowing. With the social, political, economic, territorial, and technological transformations of the first half of the 19th century, John argued, came transformations in the manner in which Americans conceived of the notions of space and time. And he proposed the circular forms and cyclical operations of the compass and the clock as particularly apt geographical and chronological metaphors for these changing habits of eye and mind. So my remarks on Dove's circles and what I will have to say about them today as metaphors of transit, expansion, interconnection, and global reach pay homage to John's work and its continuing importance for me as a scholar deeply invested as he is in understanding how the history of knowledge intersects with the history of art. So, those circles. Most of the many circles in Dove's paintings look like the ones that you see here. They are concentric, consisting of a series of circular bands with a common center. The bands vary in hue from one circle to the next. You can see that in these two examples, moon and golden sun. Sometimes they form a tonal progression, but often they do not. Now, all of these circles, and here are a few more examples. On the left is Silver Sun from 1929, and on the right is Naples' Yellow Morning from 1935. All of these circles raise the inevitable question: why? What are they doing in so many of Dove's pictures? What did he mean for them to do? To be sure, Dove's circles do what paint on canvas often does. They represent things: suns and moons, sunrises and sunsets, bodies of water, the Earth's surface, and its abundant plant life. But they hardly give us the world as we know it to look. Rather, by distorting and abstracting that world, by not only suppressing detail, but wholly disfiguring it, they present us with things that the naked eye cannot see. Here's Silver Sun again, 1929. They present us with things the naked eye cannot see, and this includes light. Not the sun's glow or its reflected glare, but light in its most literal sense: electromagnetic radiation moving in wave or particle form through the air. The jostling circles in Silver Sun that expand from a center of black through bands of white, black, and gray, also blue, suggest radiating waves making their way imperceptibly from the white, hot sun to the surface of the earth. A phenomenon Dove registers figuratively through the reflected circle hovering in the lower part of the canvas, which actually reverses the tonal procession from dark to light in the upper circles, making it light to dark in the lower. And I could talk for quite a long while about how that's a figure for photography, but I won't. I don't have time for that. But just note that it is. So he registers the transit of radiation between sun and earth, figuratively through this motif of reflection, and materially with metal-based silver paint. So this is metallic paint he's using in this canvas, which transforms the painting into an actual medium of reflection, reflecting and refracting waves of light across and through its silvery metal sheen. Concentric circles in moon, which you can actually see in the wonderfully reinstalled galleries in this building. Concentric circles in moon produce an analogous effect. They call to mind the branches and leaves of a silhouetted tree, but they also delineate the unseeable action of the moon on the earth. The trunk-like form establishes a literal connection between the moon and the earth's crust, evoking the gravitational force exerted by the one onto the other, the brown limb pressing toward the ground as if bending under the weight and pull of the radiant celestial orb. What Dove does in these paintings, then, is offer up a kind of super sight, a form of vision that through pictorial equivalence envisages some of the most fundamental phenomena and forces of existence: light, energy, gravity, the attraction between massive bodies, the motion of molecules. And this is an attempt he shared with the science of his day, which had to figure out a way to picture a whole range of newly theorized, but not necessarily observed phenomena and effects, as exemplified here by this diagram of the structure of the radium atom, which appeared in a popular physics textbook in 1923, and which only abstractly approximates the atom's hypothesized form. In this way, Dove's experiments with abstraction in the first half of the 20th century shared with those of period scientists a desire to radically enlarge the purview of human perception, the scope and depth of what humans can see and know. Now, answering the question why circles in this manner raises another query: why supersight? For of course, nothing Dove saw, in quotes, or helped his viewers to see by way of his paintings looks a whole lot like or teaches us much of anything about the laws of physics or the principles of planetary motion. His paintings, in point of fact, fail miserably as object lessons in the workings of the physical universe. This goes without saying. But what I'd like to argue is that Dove's invocation of supersight had ultimately a rather different purpose. And in the remainder of my remarks, I'm going to try to give you a sense of this other project, the why of Dove's supersight, and just what he hoped to accomplish with it. Now, this involves turning to another of the terms in the subtitle of my lecture, in this case, sound, and to a painting, Dove's Foghorns, which you see here from 1929, that casts sound as its unseeable quarry. Here, Dove's concentric circles transform sonic sensation, hearing a foghorn signal, into visible matter. Four circular forms, darkest at the center, lighter at the edges, proceed across the canvas's horizontal span. These spiraling bands of gray, purple, and plum diagram the mechanical operations innate to sonic phenomena, including the traversal of sound waves through a medium such as air. Each tonal shift in these circles marking the motion and displacement of the vibrations that produce sound, as well as the perceived transmutation of a sonic stimulus as it moves through space and time relative to a listening subject, otherwise known as the Doppler effect. The potent radiance of these circles, the way they seem to leap and blare from the surface of the canvas, also suggests something else, something like the supersonic, a capacity to exceed the mechanical limits of the auditory in order to infinitely expand and proliferate, spreading their waves and their noise across the picture plane and beyond. Other of Dove's paintings produce an identical spreading effect, in which sound features as a medium of sublime transit and expansion par excellence. In Me and the Moon from 1937, which you see here, a circle of glowing white-yellow against a brown ground extends its circumference by way of concentric bands of alternating black, gray, and dark gray-green. These bands echo the striated shape in the upper half of the canvas, a roughly, and I say quite roughly, rectangular plane that twists and turns in space, almost as if Dove had had the capacity to make sculpture out of his painting and took his hands and twisted that form. A delicate ribbon-like line meanders through the scene, taking root at the lower right and left and ascending with delicate sways and loops. Dove took the title of his painting, Me and the Moon, from a popular song he heard on the radio. This suggests that Dove, who was an avid and fascinated radio listener, he rented, I should add, a room in his Geneva building where he lived for several years to an amateur radio operator, and his diaries are filled with descriptions of talking with this guy and learning the call letters and radio signals. And it's so when I say avid and fascinated radio listener, I really mean that. This suggests that Dove, the fact that he took this title from a popular song, suggests that he intended this roving line as a visual stand-in for the unseeable and wireless transmission of radio waves through the Earth's atmosphere. The line bisects the moon on its way up, stitching together earth and sky, much as radio knits together bodies across time and space. Far-reaching radio waves cast like a fishing line or net from a radio transmitter and then hooked by a radio receiver before arriving in a listening ear. This airborne network of signals binds geographically distant and dispersed listeners into a collective unit. What results is a sonic whole or virtual collectivity formed through shared and simultaneous listening that in the 1930s still induced wonder, awe, and comparisons to the occult. The radio tune, from which Dove drew his title, again, Me and the Moon, features an earthbound man talking with a mocking moon that teases him for falling in love with a woman way out of his league. The painting, with its spiraling circles and stretch of warped, striated plane, evokes just such a cosmic connection, one made between radically unlike beings, a man and the moon, across thousands of miles of space. In Me and the Moon, then, as with Foghorns, sound manifests as a prodigious and extraordinary connective tissue, a medium of traversal and exchange that knits together vastly different and dispersed bodies and terrains. Dove evokes this kind of monumental contact or connection throughout his body of work, as I've already begun to suggest, in paintings of moons pressing on the earth, as in the National Gallery's Moon, or moons moving the Earth's oceans, as in Moon and Sea number 2, which is in the collection, which is on the left there from 1923, which is in the collection of the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. In paintings where flickering flame-like trees, as in Red Tree and Sun from 1929 on the left, also at Crystal Bridges, or razor-sharp lines like those in Golden Sun on the right, these things rivet terra firma to the celestial sphere. Or in paintings like Rain or Snow and Partly Cloudy, Rain or Snow on the left, Partly Cloudy on the right, both from the 1940s, that in their invocation of weather forecasts call to mind the global reach and impact of weather systems, along with the monumental efforts of period meteorologists to contain transcontinental and constantly transforming weather patterns within a single image or set of symbols. And I'm showing you here Rain or Snow from 1943 next to a U.S. Weather Service map, or Weather Bureau map, I should say, from around the same time, to give you a sense not only that Dove seems to be borrowing some of his visual language from period meteorology, but that what you have in the weather map is an attempt to condense global weather systems and disparate geographies into a single image with legible symbols so that it can be read, even transmitted over the radio through a special language developed for exactly this. People actually read the weather map over the radio in the 1920s and 1930s. So the point here is that what Dove is trying to do in his pictures is much like a meteorologist at the Weather Bureau did in the period, try to get all of the world into a single image and set of symbols. And also, in a work like Telegraph Pole from 1929, where the pole appears to bend and break under the sheer weight of the task of sending information as electrical signal over hundreds of miles of wire. The metal sheet on which Dove has painted his subject, underscoring the monumental conductivity and connectivity of telegraphy. Seeing the unseeable, coming face to face with the fundamental forces of the earth and heavens, fathoming in a single glance unimaginably vast distances and alien terrains. Dove's paintings in attempting these things offer their viewers a series of impossible points of view, perspectives onto physical and phenomenal existence that no human could ever possess. In this way, and paradoxically, his paintings are not supersighted at all, by which I mean that their purpose is not to grant humans the ability to see beyond the capacity of sight, electron microscope or space telescope-like. Their point is to imagine evacuating the human from the equation altogether, decentering the human subject's point of view, in order to offer up a non-human or extra-human vantage point, a place to see from that exists apart from human existence and experience. Now, this may sound like an odd thing for someone like Dove to do, given that he is celebrated in most of the scholarly literature as an artist utterly devoted to expressing his subjective, self-bound response to the natural world. But this grasp at a non-human, extra-human vantage point is exactly what we get in his paintings, including this one, Sand and Sea, from 1943, where simple, self-contained forms resemble continents and oceans packed together in the space of a world map. An effect that is augmented by the fact that Dove rendered the brown plate-like shapes with actual sand, a perfect emblem of the essential interlinking of land and water at a shoreline, and by extension, a perfect emblem of topography at a global scale. All sense of place, what the phrase sand and sea should conjure, gives way in this picture to a completely defamiliarized point of view, a pictorial hybrid of so many different kinds of perspectives, aerial, cartographic, bird's eye, divine, that it winds up being the perspective of no one thing. This, I am arguing, was Dove's aim, to suggest through his paintings the idea of a way of seeing so radically new it could be associated with nothing under the sun. Dove described this way of seeing throughout his letters, diaries, essays, and notes to self. A condition of light, he called it. And he characterized this condition as a form of vision that unfolded materially within and across all things by way of establishing and activating their essential interrelatedness and connection. And something about this notion of a condition of light reminded me, or what Jennifer Robb said about Thoreau on Darwin and this notion of a vital force innate in nature, reminded me of Dove's condition of light, because this is exactly what he's talking about here. And this condition was, for Dove, not any one person's vision, supersighted or not, but the world's, a perceptual capacity resident in material existence that an artist might, if he or she got lucky, come to configure in pictorial form. Hence Dove's circles, his suns and moons, his weather and waves, all motifs that in his pictures conjure just such a sense of expansion and interconnection and infinite spread. The world gathered up in one place because it is the world itself, not a single human seeing it that way. And hence Dove's animals, or animal-like creatures, which appear throughout his work, examples of which I'm showing you here. On the left is the brilliantly titled monkey fur from 1926, titled that way because that is actual monkey fur that you get. It's not a picture, it's an assemblage, a collage-like sculpture in which Dove has pasted aluminum, rusted metal, and monkey fur, where he got it, I don't know, monkey fur to a metal plate. And on the right is the National Gallery's gem moth dance from 1920. Animals here and in here, I'm showing you two more examples. On the left is Reminiscence from 1937, and Cows in Pasture on the right from 1935. Animals are everywhere in Dove. In tree forms, 2 from 1935, 4 one-eyed quadrupeds emerge quietly from a collection of abstract shapes. 2 bird-like creatures in Barnyard Fantasy from 1935 wrestle with another creature, grabbing at them from lower right, while other animate forms lurk in the margins, their eyes, hooves, and hands evolving from a cloudy yellow-gray murk. In Lake Afternoon, 1935, Dove paired 2 colorful creatures, part bird and part goat. Your guess is as good as mine. Or possibly monsters of the deep, whose droll, backward-glancing eyes cast them as sentient, even calculating beings, ready to pounce or, better yet, have a laugh at our expense. I always feel like these guys are rolling their eyes at the art historian who tries to make something of them. Dove just as easily could have called Red, Olive, and Yellow, his title from 1941, Portrait of a Bird, after the winged creature perched at the center of the scene. That bird, a woodpeckerish sort, fits like a puzzle piece into an array of green, brown, yellow, blue, orange, and black shapes that crowd the canvas rectangle. And the bird sets the stage for a series of charming visual and verbal puns. Dove regularly placed his signature at the bottom center of his paintings, as he did, let me go back, in Red, Olive, and Yellow. You can see it there. And you can also see it in Thunderstorm. That's actually a detail of Thunder Shower from 1940. He often placed, almost always I should say, his signature at the bottom center of his paintings, where it directly engages or responds to the formal properties or subject matter of the scene. So on the left is Thunder Shower, and it may be a little bit hard to see, but the signature is here, and what you have in the signature is a recapitulation of that burst of lightning that you get up here. And so the signature DOVE is yellow, and it streaks out into tones of a lighter yellow and then a darker yellow-green, just as the lightning, in a sense, streaks through the sky above. And on the right, I'm showing you a detail of a letter that Dove wrote to his partner, Helen Torr, who was also an artist. And he signed it by way of this funny hieroglyph. And he uses Torr's nickname for him, Sweets, which is quite sweet. And so what he's done is doubled that word Sweets and put the letters in reverse on the right-hand side. And then he's looped a spiral, here Dove circles. He's looped a spiral around those letters, and he writes next to it, "That's a hug from me to you." And this is a wonderful hybrid image sign thing. And of course, he's got, just in case we didn't get the circles, he's got a few more down here. And this, I'm showing you this because it's exemplary of Dove's signature play throughout his body of work. And this signature play is something that I knew to pay attention to and to take seriously, thanks to John, who in his book, which Jenny already mentioned, in his book Signs of the Artist, Signatures and Self-Expression in American Paintings, which I actually read around the time I began my Dove research, shortly after it came out, which gives you some sense of how long I've been working on Dove, which I read around the time I began the research, and which explores in detail such signature play. Jenny has already evoked the Frederick Church signature here on the tree in the heart of the Andes, and on the right is John Pito's The Old Violin from 1890 in the National Gallery's collection. And these are both works of art, the signatures of which John discusses and interprets really wonderfully in that book. In red, olive, and yellow, Dove's two-tone signature, you see it again here, light brown with, on the bottom, a kind of dark brown shadow or aura. This two-toned signature echoes the overall earthy tonality of the painting, and it also, and this is what I want you to focus on, it also registers, recapitulates the two-toned wing of the bird, itself a combination of light and dark brown. The letter V in Dove, here, the letter V in Dove reiterates the V shape of the bird's wing a few inches above it, while the word itself, dove, of course calls to mind a creature from the avian realm. In this way, Dove, the artist, a subject position meant to be affirmed by the signing of one's name, as in Church's Heart of the Andes, where that signature is, as Jenny described, a proclamation of utter subjectivity. That subject position winds up displaced in a painting like this one and comes to occupy, Dove the artist comes to occupy through that very signature a series of different, seemingly incommensurate categories of being, human, but also animal, object, and sign. He is a bird, he is a thing, he is a series of letters. And that means that non-human things in turn become the dove of this work. Letters of the alphabet, nouns, a proper name, and a bird. These subject-object exchanges embody the extraordinary vantage point Dove worked to configure in his paintings through his concentric circle motifs. A strategy of decentering and substitution he articulated much more literally in a series of object portraits created in the 1920s that replaced persons with brute matter. I'm showing you two examples of these portraits here on the screen. On the left is Dove's portrait of Alfred Stieglitz from 1920. I can't ever say that without laughing. From 1924. And on the right is his, also from 1924, portrait of Ralph Dusenberry, in which a human also becomes a bird-like form, in this case a kingfisher. And I should say that I was reminded, as Wendy was talking about wit, of exactly what's happening in here. If wit is the production or formulation of likeness between two incommensurate things, that's in a sense what we're getting here through the substitution of objects for humans. Equally literal in its logic of substitution is an assemblage like the National Gallery's Rain from 1924, where willow branches stand in for streaks of rain, rubber cement for raindrops, and a scratch metal plate on which all of this is laid down for a stormy, water-streaked sky. The wonderful artist Florine Stettheimer, in her group portrait of Alfred Stieglitz and his circles of artists and writers, which is in the collection of the Crystal Bridges Museum, Stettheimer knew just what Dove was up to in his art. In a panel portrait of Dove included in the scene, and I'm showing you, so let me just locate you here. This is the whole portrait, and I'm giving you a detail of this area. In a panel portrait in quotes, of Dove included in the scene, Stettheimer rendered Dove's name so that it assumes the form of a bird in flight. The slightly tipped D here serves as the bird's inclining head, the O as its body, the V as its wings, and the E at the bottom, also tipped like the head, as its feet. Here, Dove is simultaneously a person, a bird, a painting, and a string of letters. A telling parallel. Stettheimer was smart. A telling parallel to Dove's own playing around with his linguistically agile name and signature. And a perfect emblem for the task of making a painting see from the point of view not of a single embodied subject position, Dove, but from the perspective of many or all things in the world. Such a project was experimental in nature and wildly ambitious in aim, and Dove knew it. What is your artist credo, or your conception of what it is an artist undertakes to do? He was asked in 1938 by an author preparing a book on contemporary painting and sculpture. His reply, exuberantly expressed in sweeping pencil strokes, scrawled beneath the neatly typed question, the impossible. Thank you.